Brother Geoff and I were having a little conversation before Mass, and he had told me, like, we're going to use different readings for today, for the feast celebration, and he sent them, and I was working with another parishioner about, is it this? Yep, it's that. But in my mind, the whole time, what he said, he didn't say this, but what I thought he said, or what he had shared with me, was the readings for John the 23rd, right, his feast. Was last week. And so for most of this week, that's where I've had my preparation, was around those readings. And so when he referenced Zacchaeus, I'm like, oh, right, yeah, that's actually what you said. And it's funny because then when I shifted to that space, I'm like, well, but really the message is the same for us. If our feast is about this church, if it's about this space, and that is, as is always the case, it's both and. It's not either or. There are a lot of people that want to make things either or, and it just doesn't end up working in the long run. It just doesn't. I've said this to you before, and I'll say it again and again. The very nature of Jesus Christ is not either God or man. It's both God and man, right? And that's a mystery that doesn't quite fit into the physical realm of how we understand things. As a teacher for so many years, students would often say that Jesus was half God, half man. So, no, that's Hercules? Yeah, who's our half God, half man? Is it Hercules? Great, yeah. But not Jesus. Jesus is fully those things. The very understanding of God is not immanent or transcendent, out there or down here. We have two creation accounts precisely for this reason. The very first stories about God and creation, is God up there or down here? And our ancient brothers and sisters said, yes. Then you get that really quizzical verse, let us make man in our image. Right? What? Oh, that's foreshadowing of the Trinity. That's cool that you say that, but that's not at all what they were talking about when in that inspired text. That's not at all what they were talking about. Some of this is the mystery of that. And so for Zacchaeus, he starts as this small man. Small in every sense of that. He's classically petty. He's classically bending the rules, if not flat out breaking them. The redundant statement that he was a tax collector and also a wealthy man. There was no such thing as a poor tax collector. And all of them were earning in ways that were not just. And yet he wants to see. Right? And when he does see and he does experience and he is invited in, it changes him. He grows. Don't get the impression that he physically grew, but he grows as this person. And it sets up the reality that he's both and. He's both a small, petty person and a large person with a grand heart. And when we're honest, we're both of those things. We are both magnanimous and generous at spots and not at other spots in our lives. That's the journey. That's why we need a Savior. It's why we come together. Is that we're not going to do that alone. That journey of holiness, the journey to resurrection, the journey to this all coming together, this salvific vision that we will all be unified in the end. That's work. And it takes admitting the honesty about who we are. And so whether or not that's inside this church space or any other, it wouldn't matter if this was the most ornate and beautiful space if we weren't about the work of what's going on out there. All the pieces in here that were done for sacred art, obviously, I just love the John the 23rd because it's right. It's the opening of the windows, the classic thing that he said. It's the acknowledging that for so many years in the church, we were insular. And that when there were councils, when there were conciliar documents, they spent all of their time, and I mean all, naming out condemnations, saying this is the space, and everything that's outside of that, is condemned. And this council started with a very different focus. And so it's both and. It's to say, look, there are things that you cannot do, but we're going to turn and face outward. And this is what every healthy organization does. One cannot just sit and feed on oneself, right? We're both disciple, student, discipuli in Latin. We're both student and apostle, disciple and apostle. One learns and the other goes out. The Dead Sea is the ultimate example of how it doesn't work if you just take in. If you just take in. The Dead Sea is the drain of the earth. Everything flows to it. Nothing flows out of it. And by definition, it is dead. We weren't designed to be insular. The physical universe is teaching us that. And so for us as this community, as we celebrate the blessings that God gave to us, to be a community that's blessed and to build a space that allows us to worship God. But that's got to be just step one. In our worship of God, if that's not leading us to share, then what are we doing? It's seeing that God says, I see both your hearts. I see both your hearts. And the dignity that he gives to each and every one of us is the dignity that he gave Zacchaeus. Come down immediately. Get down here now, not tomorrow, not next week, not part of your New Year's resolution, but right now, so I can go to your house, so that I can show you your dignity. And when God shows us our dignity, in spite of our brokenness and all of our wounds and warts, that dignity should lead us outward to share, to give to others. And then we start to do what I think is most critical, and that is grow the good. Grow the good in us. We acknowledge that petty and small heart that we all have. But the focus for us has to be on growing the good. We're always going to work on our work areas. But we know, again, instinctively and intellectually, we know that when we focus on growing the good grows. So where is our focus? As we sit in this space and contemplate how this community began in the cafeteria at Perrysburg High School, and to be here today in this space, and really just a matter of months after we gathered to, sanctify this space, that the whole world turned on its head. I don't know what next is for us and for our world. And there's a lot in our world that might make us feel less hopeful than whatever, yesterday or a few years ago, or insert the marker you want to put in. But the thing that I know is that the God who loved us into existence is leading us to goodness and to life. I believe that with every fiber of my being, because anything less is not to be a follower of Christ. And I'm not sure why we would then be in this space, in this sacred space, except to say, Lord, whatever else is going on, I believe that you have put this goodness in my heart. I believe that you're bringing the dignity to me to share that with others, so that the world will know. So that the world will know, not just of a holy temple, but of a holy people and an opportunity to come together. As I said, there's a lot when we look out that can make us fearful. And it's okay to acknowledge what is real and what is difficult and where the battles lie in our particular culture today. But the reality is, there have always been those. There have always been the neuralgic situations of a day. But here's where we find ourselves today, in this space, in this world, in this experience. And the God that inspired John the 23rd to call that council and to be both and, a church that supports and worships God in this space and then turns out to share that with those who desperately need to know it. We see so much evidence of people denying others' dignity, that we want to be the kind of community that comes here to be strengthened and challenged, to go out there to share the goodness, the life, the light, the dignity for each and every one. That's what it is to grow the good. It's not to pretend we don't have the small, petty side of us, but it is to acknowledge that the greater insight is in the goodness. I think it was Julian of Norwich that once said, "In our eyes, we are nothing but fallen on the ground. And in God's eyes, he sees us as having never fallen." Both things are true, but the deeper insight is God's. The deeper insight is that God can see who we are when we are more faithful to the call. So let us accept the challenge. And in this Eucharist, which is both and, which is both sign and substance, right? It's both of those things. It continues to look like bread and wine, but it continues to be transubstantiated to us as his presence to feed us today. More dignity being given to us that we don't deserve. Why? To strengthen us to go out there and to share God's goodness. That's our bigness. That's our grandness. And so as we receive him today, may we walk tall coming out of this building, not as pride, but as humility to love those that God puts in our life. May God be praised.